Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Rainy day today, but time for another quick video, and here is why you might never have to buy a Porsche Taycan, or indeed any battery electric vehicle for that matter. But before we get there, just wanted to say huge thanks to anyone who has already subscribed to the channel. It's very kind of you and very much appreciated, and if you haven't, please do. Very soon I am going to be giving away a massive 500 Great British Pounds to a charity of your choice. Yes, one of you lucky viewers is going to be able to choose a charity close to your heart, and I will give them £500. It is as simple as that. What's not to like, eh? So do please subscribe, do share it around, and more information about just how we're going to do that will follow at some point in the very near future. So do keep your eyes peeled for that one on the channel. But I'm in a battery electric vehicle right now, the Taycan, and it felt like there was a time when we were going to be forced down the road of battery electric vehicles very quickly, probably faster than a lot of us would like. The reason I got this is not because of that. I purely got one because of my curiosity. I kind of quite like tech, and I just wanted to see what it was like, and I love it. It's a brilliant car. Challenges of charging and infrastructure aside, it is a wonderful car, and I'm glad I tried it. But it is not my only car. I have combustion cars too. I love combustion cars. It's what I grew up with. I appreciate the sound, the theatre, the joy that they give you, and nothing is quite as visceral as flying up the road or around a track with an engine blasting away underneath the hood, firing out those notes from the exhaust and just putting a smile on your face. Nothing quite beats that. And this time where it felt like they were going to be forced upon us is kind of already feels like it might be in regression a little bit. Now, the Taycan is a real success story for Porsche, but they've just dropped production on this, and they're now doing, I think, a single shift a day versus a double shift, making these things because demand has decreased. There's no escaping it. It's a very expensive platform, and people are just generally being put off EVs by everything they read and hear about in the press, depreciation, etc., challenges charging them, and it's not really a great time for these things right now. And I think for me, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because cars are used for people to get around in, and if it's not working for them, then they're going to stick with what they know, right? So there's nothing wrong with the sentiment at the moment. And we've got, of course, the Macan EV coming along very soon. I think that is looking very healthy from a pre-order perspective. So, you know, it's not completely over for these things. We're just in a bit of a trough at the moment as people kind of get their heads around what it means to them. But Porsche, yeah, got to give them their credit, because of course they went hard on battery electric vehicles, right? Really hard on these things. But it wasn't the only thing they started to explore. Of course, there is e-fuel as well, right? Porsche, a heavy investor in e-fuel. Of course, Porsche, their bread and butter is combustion cars, and you could say the most famous one. You couldn't say, I mean, you have to say, I think, the most famous car they do is the 911, right? Which of course is very much a combustion car. The new one getting a slight hybridization, but still has an engine at its heart. And Porsche absolutely want to keep it that way. There are no plans to batterify the 911. And I think if they did, so many people would run screaming to the hills, it would be game over for them. So they're hard on e-fuels as well, going in hard on e-fuels. What is e-fuel? What does it mean? Well, e-fuel is not biofuel. Biofuel is a fuel that is produced through chemical process or fermentation, etc., of what generally is large agricultural crops. So you grow something and you convert that into biofuel or converted cooking oil, whatever it may be, right? That is biofuel. Biofuel isn't necessarily carbon neutral. Biofuel also readily available now and used now by a lot of people that run trucks, for example, or buses, etc. Also, ethanol is a biofuel at heart, right? Produced through crops and synthesis that way. But an e-fuel is not those things. An e-fuel is something different altogether. An e-fuel is made through the electrolysis of water to create hydrogen. That has to be electrolysis provided with electricity from a renewable source, sustainable source, for it to be carbon neutral. What you then do is you combine it with CO2 that is harvested from the air, or some process that produces CO2, burning fossil fuels, for example. You capture that CO2 and then you heat the CO2 and the hydrogen together under high pressures, not to combust them, but to form longer molecular structures, just like you find in normal fossil fuels, right? Without too many dirty side effects, I believe, right? It's a cleaner, purer source of fuel. So you get fuel that you can use in combustion engine cars, which is cool. Now, the main concerns were around the scalability of this. How do they scale it up to simply replace all of the current fossil fuel that we burn, all the petrol stations, all the fuel stations, etc.? How do you convert those to be able to provide you with e-fuels easily and cheaply? And the biggest problem with e-fuel at the moment is it's not mass produced, and I believe, I've read it, it retails at the moment, or you can buy it for about $20 per litre, which is 10-15 times the cost of what we have to pay now, so completely unviable. But the hope is, and I've been reading a few articles around this, that people can get it down to a similar price that we pay now for standard fossil fuels, which would be very cool indeed. As I say, carbon neutral, it has to be carbon neutral to be viable. And here's the other thing as well. Now, e-fuel isn't very efficient. I believe only about 40% of the energy that you need to put into that entire process is converted to combustion, because of all, of course, the energy and electrolysis, etc., harvesting the CO2, yada yada, all of that stuff. So it's not very efficient, whereas a battery electric vehicle, about 70 to 80% of the energy you put in to the battery, you get out as energy for the motor and forward propulsion. So, brilliant. It's working very well for battery electric vehicles. Now, we all know there is a looming ban in the EU, 2035, for combustion engines, that is diesel and petrol engines. No longer are they going to be allowed to be sold as new cars in the new car format from 2035. And we've just got a new government in the UK, literally just happened. And they are looking to potentially bring forward from 2035 to 2030 a ban on the sale of all new diesel and petrol vehicles. But in the EU, there is a lady called Ursula von der Leyen, who is the leader of the European People's Party. And she is trying to table a bill that will allow the use of e-fuels beyond 2035. And here is the quote: revising the rules for CO2 reduction for new cars and vans to allow for the use of alternative zero-emissions fuels beyond 2035. This will be very exciting indeed, should it come to fruition, and I really do hope it does. If we can continue to drive the cars that we know and love now with an engine in a much cleaner, more sustainable way, then this is brilliant news. A lot of manufacturers are really struggling with this kind of flipping to and fro between legislation and what's happening and demand and the market perception in general for electrification of cars. They're struggling with what to do. Toyota, for example, aren't bothering with BEVs anymore. They're simply looking at hybrids. They think that's the way to go for now. But cars that have already explored battery electric, could that be a good thing for them going forward? Because they're going to be ready for it, right? If it does get a little bit more force. But what I like is the fact that both of these are being explored by many manufacturers, and hopefully we will have options going forwards. As the consumer, we'll have the option of getting a battery electric vehicle should we want that, should it suit our needs. We'll also have the ability to get a combustion car, a carbon neutral one, potentially using e-fuels. giving you a slightly better sense of well-being about those journeys that you make using a combustion car. It's good for the consumer. It's really good for the consumer. And I just like the fact that we aren't necessarily going to lose these wonderful combustion cars that we've had and love and have nurtured for so long, right? Now, the other thing as well that we have to consider is, what does it mean for places where they have a ban? Some cities and towns have a ban on combustion cars. Will e-fuels be allowed because they're carbon neutral going forwards and they burn more cleanly? At least that is the premise. Or will they still be battery electric vehicles only? That remains to be seen. But for me, it is a very interesting time, and one that I hope continues to gain traction and gain weight. Now, it is very early days for e-fuels at this moment in time, but you are going to see a lot of startups already popping up to look at the mass production of e-fuels as a viable alternative to fossil fuels. And I just think where we're at right now in terms of infrastructure, it's probably a better transition should we eventually all go battery electric vehicles, or that be forced at some point, because the infrastructure is readily available. We have fuel stations everywhere, which I'm sure could be converted to run and provide e-fuels very easy. In fact, there might be no conversion needed at all. It's simply a case of cleaning the tanks out, filling them up with e-fuels, right? Or in parallel, we've got that infrastructure in place. What we don't have in place right now is EV charging infrastructure. It's woefully bad in the UK. So I really do hope that the European People's Party, and they are the biggest lawmakers in the EU right now, can push to get this legislation in stone going forward, so that we have the ability to use e-fuels in combustion cars beyond 2035, and then some, I hope. But the other bit as well that gets me thinking is, what about existing petrol and diesel cars, right? Because if we start to phase out new cars from 2035, you're not going to be able to purchase them beyond 2035. If we ban from 2035 combustion cars using fossil fuels, and we force batteries on people, does that mean that the existing fossil fuel infrastructure, all those petrol stations, those gas stations, will start to close down? And what does that mean for our existing fossil fuel cars that we own now, that we want to continue to run, especially those wonderful classics that we know and we love? That is a bit of a concern, right? So I really hope we can get this e-fuel thing on the go, right? Because for me, it is going to be a wonderful world to be in, where we've got that choice and we're doing it in a green and sustainable way. That's it for this one. Do stay safe, stay well. See you on the next one, and bye for now.